I do kind of question the legitimacy of what's really happening, or is this just a misdirection and a smokescreen for what's really happening underneath? So they can blame the inflation now on Russia. It's crisis to crisis, right? Which keeps everybody off kilter. And what we've been seeing for a couple years now are barren grocery store shelves.
The things nature's going to throw at us is one set of circumstance, but
Yes.
what the government's in this shortage that's coming in, this is a whole different set of circumstance to think about. We rely on the grains so heavily from, what's been set up for the last 70 or 100 years. We never questioned, would it be there next year? Check this out. Many people today struggle to manage their weight, but this is more true than ever after the age of 20, because after the age of 20, our body's metabolism slows down by as much as 4% every decade. By the time we're 50, we've experienced a 10% drop or more in our metabolism. That's a risk to health. That's why I highly recommend adaptwithketo.com. This product works by increasing the ketone levels inside your body, which in turn support boosted metabolism. A scoop a day, I saw improvements for my energy levels while working on the farm. And the best part is I never had to cut out carbs or make other changes to my diet. If you've been looking for a great way to support your weight loss goals, you'll love adaptwithketo.com. Take 51% off for the next 24 hours. Adaptwithketo.com, or click on the link in the description box below. And now on with the video. Good afternoon, everyone. This will be one of the most important interviews that you're going to watch through the entire year on timelines. Money and food. Important for both. Keeps your body alive, yet allows you to buy things to be able to prepare for the future. Have with me Lynette Zang, ITM Trading. You can check out their YouTube channel. Incredible amounts of information on where the reset might start, the triggers for the reset, how you want to protect your wealth, and many other things to keep not just generational wealth, but looking far into the future dynastic wealth. So how do you protect during these cataclysmic economic times? And how do you protect during these cataclysmic protein deficient times? Because protein is going to be valuable, as I was told by a very reliable source. Protein is going to be very valuable.
Yeah.
So hopefully today we can throw some ideas back and forth. And I'm just going to preface it by saying we live in a world of cycles. Time is not linear as we've been taught since birth. Cycles return. The world's been based on cycles since time immemorial. That's why the heavens spin, why we have the beginning of a new year, why the zodiac works. Understanding the amplification of solar cycles in terms of centuries, millennia, or even the 12-year solar cycle, 11.7-year solar cycle. So these cycles are built in. The mythologies and science today can prove that we're in cycles. Our solar system revolving around another solar system and another star is also an orbit in itself that can be calculated. Above the ecliptic, below the ecliptic, you know where we sit today, 220 million years in the future, we'll come back to the same exact spot. Those kind of length of cycles have been known, mapped out. So what are the effects on our world here? Do you think these stories of legends of breaths of dragons, maybe they were referencing solar winds, the pouring out of the heavens? Well, maybe that was some sort of effect electromagnetically that caused static electricity to build up in cloud layers and ring out the heavens, literally. So when we go back through myth, legend, prophecy, we come to right this time. I mean, look at these cycles, and that's the way to preface it. But who would have very specific information about the cycles, understand the change of society and civilization was at the crux of time right now? And if you knew that information, would you not try to continue to control power moving through the cycle, controlling, riding on top of a natural cycle to retain power during the collapse moving through? But what about you and I here as the result of all these things that are happening? Fertilizer shortages were inbound here anyway. 13% global fertilizer reduction before the Ukraine, before the Russian crisis. 13% reduction in global fertilizer was already here well before that. And herbicide shortages. which we're going to knock global supply chains of anything grains down about 18 to 20% anyway without Russia. So I think there's a few maskings of causes here. I think it's being more controlled, and especially your control to food. So Lynette, thanks for joining, because I'm curious about the control to money and how we protect ourselves. I'll give some timelines for food, and I'm hoping that you can reciprocate and give some ideas about how you think money is moving and protecting our wealth as we get through both cycles, protein and money.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy to do it because you've been very influential on my food development and my property, both down here and also in my bug out house. So yeah, I'm happy to do that.
We see right now, are there really shortages that you think might manifest in the gold and silver market? Because it seems that the silver might not be there. The LBMA not being able to take in Russian gold right now as good delivery from some of the Russian, let's say central or not central bank, but the Russian banks that used to supply, that actually owned the gold mines that were doing the refining and sent it to the LBMA. I mean, there's a lot of pull right now. It seems like a lot of physical delivery, and now there's word that there's not actually the 1,000-ounce silver bars available anymore. I just don't know what to believe or what's on the horizon. I'm getting a bunch of snippets here, there, and everywhere, but I think you know far better than I.
Well, for one thing, just going back to the Russian good delivery, yes, they're not taking the new bars, but they're happy to take the old bars. So, but in anything physical, whether it's food or it's metals, there's a finite amount of it. And so whoever controls that can then thus, perhaps control everybody. I'm hoping that we avoid that by all of this education and people getting prepared with their metals as well as the food. Because what the metals do is they really protect your purchasing power over time, which is why we see central banks accumulating as much of it as possible. And certainly Russia and China up to this point have been getting into position for what we're experiencing today. This is probably not a particularly popular thought, but I do kind of question the legitimacy of what's really happening, or is this just a misdirection and a smokescreen for what's really happening underneath? So they can blame the inflation now on Russia. It's crisis to crisis, right? Which keeps everybody off kilter. And what we've been seeing for a couple years now are barren grocery store shelves, while the local farmers are going out and big pharma. Now there's a problem with fertilizer, as you said, and other things. That's why I put in my ponds, actually. So I don't have an issue around fertilizer because I grow my own.
Yeah, we're going to have to take responsibility and in our
100%.
own fertilizer production, as well as herbicide production and pesticide production. Now, JDAM is a popular method out of Korea that uses all natural ingredients that you might have of things that you would consume in table scraps and be able to compost different types of things you might find in a forest or a mountain setting, whatever that is, to create fertilizers and pesticides. I was wiped out last year with Japanese beetles. We didn't hop on top of them quickly enough, and the orchard gone.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, and the freeze just came in. It was 14 degrees Fahrenheit after everything had bloomed out here, and then almost, 100% of the blooms and flowers dropped off. Luckily today I see a little bit more new growth. The things nature's going to throw at us is one set of circumstance,
Yes.
but what the governments in this shortage that's coming in, this is a whole different set of circumstance to think about. We rely on the grains so heavily from, what's been set up for the last 70 or 100 years. We never questioned, would it be there next year?
Right.
So here's the thing. I just a few days ago bought a 490-pound calf from the Amish, and there's an Amish farm not too far from here, but a mile and a half, and they have 500 acres. But when I was there was land that was tilled. I hadn't seen that area tilled before. So I asked, are you breaking this ground here? And all 500 acres are going into production. They're going to grow their own grains because their seed supplier in Ohio told them that they're going to get them the seed possibly, but they're not going to get as much as they ordered originally, because they order about 18 wheeler truckload when they bring supplies in. So they're like, okay, this is not sitting well, that their suppliers can't get them the seed they need. 30% of all global exports are from Ukraine and Russia and that whole Black Sea region. That includes Belarus. If you look at it, and the really nitty gritty is Ukraine is not getting their corn seed for planting. So the USDA is coming out and saying, well, maybe Ukraine will knock off by a third the production. But see, that's sort of a fictitious headline with those rosy forecasts they give you. If the seed's not there, they're not going to plant it. So that I don't care what you're going to knock it off of. So then they're going to rely on Brazil, but Brazil relies 85% of the fertilizer from Russia. So then we get into this whole cascading spiral of all this interconnected agricultural business where Argentina suspended exports, Paraguay's down 60% on their soybean crop. There's going to be almost nothing coming out of Russia and Ukraine. We are going into a global, I wouldn't say famine, but the amount of food out there is going to cause panic to the point we've never seen anything like this before. So at what point does the money trail on? Is it going to be the food first and the money second? Or the money food cost first and then the panic second? I'm not sure which way it's going to work.
Well, you know, when you're looking what's happening, they're really running parallel. So we've already entered, even though nobody is talking about this yet, and the 5 and 10 year just inverted, the yield curve inverted, and so that, you know, foretells recession. This is going to be so much bigger than a recession, but I feel like they're paralleling each other because we already have more people hungry, and food insecurity is just growing, and the prices are expanding. And you know, when you're talking about seeds, you know, that is the importance. You know, I've been saying forever, you have to be as self-sufficient and independent as possible, which also means saving your own seeds. I mean, I think we have to get very local. And we have to make sure, like you've pointed out, we have to have the ability to control the climates. And I'm putting in those geodesic hot houses in my bug out location, and they're 17 feet high, which means that I'm also going to have the ability to plant trees inside. I'll have some outside as well, but you know, I mean, I think that I don't know which is really coming first because I feel like they're coming at the same time. The system is clearly breaking down. Even looking at this completely dysfunctional stock market where everything physical has been turned into a security. And once it's a security, they can multiply that to make it look like there's a whole lot more than there really is. As you talked about the gold and silver, there's a finite amount of it. And it was already a couple of years ago when we had the silver short that the SLV, the silver ETF, changed their prospectus because they knew they couldn't get enough silver for the basket. So you've got silver, which gets used up in production. There's a finite amount of that, and it's trading at what, 26 bucks an ounce? I mean, it's so severely undervalued, secondary monetary metal. And then on top of that, you have central banks accumulating massive amounts of gold, and there's not that much gold out there. So they don't want us to accumulate those things, and so they suppress the price by creating a whole bunch of silver and gold that do not exist, while they themselves, the powers that be, are massively accumulating it. Because whatever little bit of food, medicine, those kinds of things that are going to be available, you know, I mean, for the masses, I'm sorry, but we're going to see a massive depopulation. I mean, globally on average, when we go through this, it's about 80% of the population ends up in absolute abject poverty. And a lot of people die, particularly the very young and the very old. But people die because there's just not enough food. And we're already seeing that in too many parts of the world.
Yeah, it's really sad in humanity that we have so much technology and so much interconnectedness and so much wealth, the most wealth ever accumulated on the planet ever. But yet people starve and don't have enough food. I try to rationalize that. How is that even possible? You know, except for manipulation and control of wealth into a very, 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 very small few hands. I mean, the world should not be in any way, shape, or form the way we are in now And I'm not talking in a communist way. I'm going to take your one loaf of bread and give it to somebody else. But that tech should be enough for everybody to be able to produce what they need in the countries for eating. And
Yep.
and the geodesic domes are a great idea. And continuous fruit drop is what you're going to want to look for if you have trees. Like the way we put out the plantation or this fruit orchard out in the front here, got 120 trees. It was for each individual species, which now I know was a mistake to put an early blossoming and early blooming fruit variety that would yield fruit in June in an open setting. But where you're at in an indoor environment, so what you would do is you would take these tree varieties, I'm using plums for an example, that would set flower and set blossom very, very early, like now. So it would mature to fruit in June. And then a couple months later, there'd be a whole nother set that would fruit and flower, and they would give you fruit through August. And then there would be a late maturing fruit and flowering that would give you your fruits all the way through, say, late September into early October. And they call it continuous fruit drop, where pretty much from the earliest possible time for fruit and flower all the way through the latest, that you're continuously getting a range of. And now, if you're going to plant outdoor, I would not suggest the early flowering varieties, only go to later or mid. But an indoor variety there, you could just keep spinning the clock on that. You could do that all seasons long in your geodesic grow domes.
Yeah. Although I have done that too on my farm here in Phoenix, where I looked at what was going to be producing, and so I actually planted into that. So I constantly have different, like right now it's the tail end of the grapefruits and orange season, but it's the beginning of the mulberry and peach season. And so, I have done that. We talked many years ago, and I thought, what a good idea to make sure that there was always some fruit, because we are going to have to learn how to eat with the seasons again. And the food is so much healthier when you do that. And, you were talking about pest control, taking the compost, mixing it with the fertilized water. I put in 5 ponds on my property, and I have chickens and I have ducks, and we're putting in some rabbit hatch because, as you said, protein becomes really, really critical. And so I definitely, I think you were one of the first people, I think the second person that I ever interviewed on my channel so many years ago. And that was just a huge influence on how I developed everything. I don't know that I care that, I know the world depends on wheat. I don't really have enough open acreage to do anything like that, but there are things that you can do that'll give you a lot of protein, like quinoa and amaranth and things like that can also add to your protein. And one tree that is probably, if you live in a warm enough climate or you have the ability to take it indoors, I would say that if I only had a choice of one tree to grow, that would be my moringa tree.
Oh, the miracle tree, my favorite too.
Absolutely. I have a hedge, but we are definitely going to be planting that in the domes coming up shortly. They're going under construction starting May 1st, so I'm really excited about that, and we'll be able to get that in place. But like you said, the miracle, it has calcium, it has proteins, it has a bazillion minerals. You could actually live on this, and every single part of the plant is usable and medicinal as well. You talk about, when you're looking at the food, maybe a sub chapter of that is your medicine. And so to put in a medicinal garden and to put in medicinal foods like jujubes are a great medicinal tree. It's a fruit tree. And those dry, so you can also use them for sugar. So I think we have to be thoughtful when we're planting things out, like the moringa seeds also are great to create your own oil, right? So there are a lot of things that we need to do, but it's your health and it's your wealth. And for so long, they have really destroyed the quality of the food that we were consuming. That means that you can't think as clearly and you may miss things that you otherwise would not miss. So for me, it's your health and it's your wealth. And you've got to have gold and silver because that will maintain your wealth part. But you have to have food, water, energy, security, barterability, wealth preservation, community, which is arguably the most important part, and shelter, because not everybody can do what you've been doing, what I've been doing, but they bring other skills to the table.
I forgot what I was going to say. Must be the food. Anyway.
Well, it's true. I mean, how much nutritional quality, even when they took over organic, right? It used to be an apple looked like an apple that you pulled off the tree, but now when you go into the store, and it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. Well, that's because of the technology. I mean, they changed the rules in organic, but I like my fruit that I can pick right off my tree much better.
Yeah, and if a caterpillar went in there first, and that's why a lot of old timers had pocket knives, because they would either cut the peach or the apple open first, or if it had a little blemish on it, they just cut right through it and flick it off back in, and then eat right through it. I mean, that's the way as kids we got it too. You picked an apple, there was a hole in it or something, a little blemish on it, that didn't matter, just cut it off.
Right.
But wheat, these kind of really intensive heavy row crops,
Yeah.
you got to have a machine for that. And the thing about, you mentioned wheat is in a lot of stuff. Well, it's in more
Yes.
products across the planet. Corn,
soybeans, wheat.
Yeah.
I mean, all that processed food has all of those.
Well, here's the thing about the corn this year. The fertilizer shortages that were inbound anyway. And I've done a series of videos. I think I did 3 full-length videos on this particular point alone. I thought it was so important that it was setting the stage for what was coming. And then Russia and Ukraine just got in the way of it. The fertilizer shortage was coming in at 13%. So I asked a few people who really knew about, yields. It came out to basically a 1-to-1, where a 1% decline in fertilizer application in the field resulted in a 1% decline in the yields out of your acreage per bushel on a bushel basis. So a 13% decline meant a 13% decline coming out of the fields. But that was globally. And then you added in the herbicides. And this was kind of that Rubik's Cube that threw me off there for a minute. So herbicides are not created equally. Corn requires mainly glyphosate or Roundup, which I'm not a fan of, because it's grasses mainly that are in the corn rows that are super tenacious, hard to get rid of.
Right.
But yeah, and they didn't have enough glyphosate this year. They're down about 10 to 12%. I think it's running pretty equivalent because they're using the same supply chains for the same chemical inputs. So I was asking about the declines in yields off of not having enough herbicides, and it comes out to a 0.85, almost somewhere in that ratio. So we could either round it up to 1 or round it down to 0.5, whatever it is, it adds on top of the existing fertilizer shortages, because those plants are going to try to uptake the same fertilizer, the same
Right.
nutrients that were put on there. So then you're getting into this downward spiral because you don't have the herbicide inputs, you don't have the fertilizers. And then the USDA was coming out asking farmers to try to mix and match like class 3, class 4, class 23 herbicides to get something similar to glyphosate to run down the rows. So you got all these people out there playing chemistry set that really don't know what they're doing. And it is the amount of global food shortage before this Russia thing was going to be tremendous anyway, tremendous. And I don't know if it's a cover story for it to collapse the economy, because then they can move into their central bank digital currency and all those things we can talk about. But the machines and the corn, there's going to be a lot of products that might disappear because the corn's not going to be coming in. And like I say, Ukraine did not get their corn planting seed. Don't even believe the USDA on the numbers of a third loss. They didn't get the seed to plant. See that, and it'll, as we move forward in the seasons, the numbers should come out and they'll get worse and worse and worse on their projections.
So part of what I'm hearing, so correct me if I'm wrong, is that people need to be really providing their own food and their own sources, because like your wealth, if you are dependent upon the sources from the governments and all of these agencies, then you're going to starve. So you have to be proactive with your health, with your food and your wealth, create your own food source and your own fertilizer source and your own pesticide source, because the other part of that is a healthy plant almost repels, it's kind of like a healthy body repels disease, or at least it makes it a lot harder to get in there. The same thing is true with plants. My sister, who's a master gardener, once told me that a sick plant kind of sends out this almost like a little radar thing. And so the bugs know that these are sick plants and it's easier to attack them. Now, I don't know whether or not that's true because I haven't heard that myself personally, but her onions are like this. So if she tells me something like that, I would have a tendency to believe her. She's been doing it for, well, she's a little older than me and I'm 67, and she started in her teen years. So that gives you an idea of how long. But if you're counting on the system to be able to buy seeds or fertilizer or anything else or food, period, to feed your family, I think that is a really dangerous position to be in. You need to be, community gardens. You have to be, I love that you're in a farming community because that community can come together to help. Maybe somebody does dairy, somebody does wheat and corn, etc. But aren't they saving back their own seeds?
Yeah, they are. And I'm glad you said that because just a few days back, to take a look and going out to the Amish farm to get our calf, in addition to them, tilling and getting ready to plant an enormous amount on the regular, what I was told was, here, I even wrote this down, the amount that they're going to put in their store for sales. Like you can drive up to their Amish farm and you can go in there and you can, go buy fresh veggies from the farm there. They're going to reduce their sales by 20%, meaning they're getting ready to pull back and prepare and store all that they're not going to put it out for sale. So that should really send a huge signal that they're at the point of, they're the most prepared people on the planet that can get through anything. They don't even live with the electricity. And they're at the point of going, oh, it's gone so far south that we need to pull back and start saving food for ourselves now. So how does that do for farmers markets? Because the farmers are going to be, since in the farming community, they are talking about some of the same things. The petrol's getting really expensive. So they got to drive like 30 minutes up to this farmer's market away from here. And they're going to start saving more, canning, drying, whatever they're going to do. So the new thing is, if you can come out and buy from the farm in bulk, as in farmers market bulk, they don't have to go up to the farmers markets on Saturdays. So you're going to see a swing in availability of what you purchased at the farmers market. The number of people that will be there as vendors, because they would prefer you to come out and bulk buy off their land versus having them to do. So a lot more is going online and getting you out to their physical premise to sell you and load your trunk at their farm, not them coming to you anymore. So there's going to be a gigantic shift in the way food's available for us. So if you're relying on farmers markets, then what? If you're relying on the Amish, then what? But for heaven forbid, the supermarkets close down or need a digital rationing card, some sort of ID facial ration card to go into the supermarket and get your food. How many steps back are you to knowing your fourth, fifth, sixth source for food down the way now?
Everything's going into rationing, and hey, you can hold it on your phone, so you can hold all your wealth on your phone. You can hold all those cards on your phone, and you can get, then what? Who's in control of you? Because you mentioned earlier, when people are hungry and hopeless, and if the government comes in and says, well, here you go, you may or may not be aware, because there was a big fanfare, I think it was maybe 2019, with the Fed Now accounts, where every single person in the U.S. actually has a direct account, whether you know it or not, you have a direct account with the Federal Reserve. And they did that because it'd be so much easier to just push a button and push the new money into the hands of the population. They won't have to send a check, or they won't have to do a wire. They just push a button and the money is in there. The problem is that the money has no value, because it basically has almost no value now either, and it's losing value more and more rapidly. That's what inflation is. And I love how Lloyd Blankfein is not my favorite person. He used to be the head of Goldman Sachs. And he's just a snake. And he comes out and he says, well, inflation, we can deal with inflation. It's deflation that we can't deal with. Well, if you are very wealthy and or you have you're self-sufficient, then yeah, you can deal with inflation. I mean, I'm having people over for dinner tonight, and about 95% of the meal is right from my gardens because I'm also growing my own meat chickens. So we're having chicken and roasted vegetables and, and salad, and that's all from my farm. So I don't really have to worry too much about it. But we all need to be looking at this seriously so that we are not dependent on the system, because let them come in and say, here, this will save you. And people will be so hungry, so hopeless, so scared that they'll accept it. And then, I mean, you lived in China for quite some time, right?
I
And,
did.
what kind of a hold do the Chinese have over their population?
Complete, to the point of rounding you up and taking you away at any point in time for the wrong word.
For the wrong word, yep.
Not even the wrong action. Forget the action's way wrong word. You're gone.
So I always felt like China was showing the rest of the world how to 100% completely control their population. And you had mentioned about the rice shortage and those kinds of things. Do you think that's what we're seeing or going to see here?
It is, because if you look at the imports from China, they have about over half the world's everything in the country for food right now, from corn to rice to wheat, soybean. If you look at those charts that have been coming out, I think Goldman Sachs putting out the export figures there. China holds at least half of the world's what has already been harvested and processed